July 11, 1991. Hundreds of Nigerian pilgrims were waiting for their flights at Jeddah Airport to return home from the Holy Lands. These people, who had completed their pilgrimage and were spiritually renewed, were eager to reunite with their families. However, none of them knew that this journey would be their last. It was early morning hours, and Jeddah Airport was bustling as usual. The pilgrimage season had ended, and thousands of Muslims had filled the airports to return home after this sacred journey. The terminal building was filled with the voices, prayers, and farewells of pilgrims from different countries. Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 was the beginning of a tragic story that would go down as a black page in the aviation history of not only Nigeria, but the entire world. This flight was Nigeria's biggest aviation disaster at the time and would hold this title for many years. In this video, we will examine the details, causes, and consequences of this disaster in which 261 innocent lives were lost. We will also discuss the changes this tragedy brought to aviation safety and the lessons that remain valid even today. Aircraft and crew. Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 was a Douglas DC-861 type aircraft. This aircraft model was produced in the 1960S and was a reliable model widely used for long-distance flights at that time. However, in 1991, this type of aircraft was already considered aged. The DC-8 series was a 4-inch main, narrow-body passenger aircraft produced by Douglas Aircraft Company. This aircraft, which was the main rival of the Boeing 77, was produced from 1958 to 1972. The DC-861 variant was a larger capacity version designed for long-range flights. The aircraft was registered with tail number 5NANN and was part of the Nigeria Airways fleet. This aircraft was manufactured in 1969 and was 22 years old at the time of the accident. By the standards of that time, this age was considered quite advanced. The aircraft underwent regular maintenance and had a flight certificate. The crew consisted of experienced pilots who regularly served on pilgrimage flights. The captain had thousands of hours of flight experience and specialized in DC-8 aircraft. The first officer was similarly experienced. The cabin crew were personnel who had served on long-distance flights and received training in various emergency procedures. Nigeria Airways was Nigeria's national airline at the time and operated both domestic and international flights. The company would organize charter flights to Saudi Arabia, especially during pilgrimage periods. Passengers. The return journey of pilgrims. The vast majority of the 261 people on the aircraft were Nigerian Muslims who had completed their pilgrimage. Among them were elderly people, middle-aged people, and even some young pilgrims. For everyone, this was the end of the most important spiritual journey of their lives. The pilgrimage is considered one of the 5 pillars of Islam and is a sacred duty that every Muslim must perform at least once in their lifetime. These passengers had circumambulated the Kaaba, performed Waqfa Arafat, stoned the devil, and completed all pilgrimage rituals. Now they wanted to return home to their families and share this sacred experience. Along them were retired teachers, small merchants, farmers, and people from all walks of society. Most had saved money for years for this journey, making the biggest investment of their lives. The pilgrimage was not only a spiritual journey, but also a great financial sacrifice. Takeoff and first moments. On July 11, 1991, what seemed like a routine day began at Jeddah Airport. The pilgrimage season was over. Thousands of pilgrims were waiting for their flights to return to their countries. Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 would go from Jeddah to Sokoto and then to Lagos. The aircraft was prepared for takeoff in the early morning hours local time. Passengers were boarded, luggage was loaded, and all routine checks were performed. Weather conditions were normal, and there were no obstacles for takeoff. At 7:10, the aircraft took off from the runway at Jeddah Airport. The first minutes passed normally. The aircraft continued to climb on its designated route. The pilots were in normal communication with air traffic control. The beginning of the disaster. However, about 10 minutes after takeoff, serious problems began in the aircraft. The first signs came from the left main landing gear area of the aircraft. Overheating had occurred here, and the situation was rapidly worsening. The source of the problem was that the left main landing gear did not fully close after takeoff. This situation was creating both aerodynamic friction and causing overheating. The open landing gear was encountering severe wind resistance due to the aircraft's rapid movement, creating excessive stress on mechanical parts. Under normal conditions, the landing gear is completely closed within a few minutes after takeoff and embedded in the aircraft's fuselage. This way, both aerodynamic efficiency is achieved and fuel savings are obtained. However, in Flight 2120, this system had malfunctioned. The heat first caused the tires to burn. Although aircraft tires are resistant to high temperatures, they began to burn due to continuous friction and excessive heat. This fire soon spread to other combustible materials in the nearby area. Even worse, the heat was also beginning to affect fuel lines. In DC-8 aircraft, fuel tanks are located inside the wings, and fuel lines pass through various parts of the aircraft. The fire in the landing gear area had become a threat to these critical systems. Initially, the pilots could not fully understand the seriousness of the situation. The warning systems in the cockpit were not yet giving full alarm, and the first signs appeared to be a solvable technical problem. Warning lights on the control panel began to light up, but there were standard procedures for such situations. They first tried to assess the situation. Emergency declaration. About 15 minutes after takeoff, the situation had become uncontrollable. A fire had broken out on the left side of the aircraft, and this fire was spreading rapidly. The pilots immediately declared an emergency and announced that they wanted to return to Jeddah Airport. Air traffic control immediately gave Flight 2120 priority for emergency landing. Fire and ambulance crews at the airport were put on alert. The runway was cleared and emergency protocols were activated. Meanwhile, the situation inside the aircraft was also getting worse. Passengers began to notice smoke and smell coming from the left side of the aircraft. Cabin crew were trying to keep passengers calm, but a panic atmosphere was slowly engulfing the aircraft. Final minutes. As the aircraft tried to return to Jeddah Airport, the fire got out of control. Flames had spread to the structural parts of the aircraft and began to affect critical systems. Electrical systems began to malfunction, and the pilot's ability to control the aircraft decreased. The most critical moment was when the fire reached the hydraulic systems. These systems were vital systems that moved the aircraft's control surfaces. Hydraulic power loss severely limited the pilot's ability to maneuver the aircraft. As the aircraft tried to approach the airport, the pilots were trying to control the aircraft with their last strength. However, the fire had spread so much that the structural integrity of the aircraft was compromised. The crash. 7:28, just 18 minutes after takeoff, Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 crashed into a desert area about 13 kilometers from Jeddah Airport. The aircraft hit the ground with a huge explosion and immediately caught fire. The crash was so violent that the aircraft completely disintegrated. A giant fireball formed among the desert sands. This fire, visible from kilometers away, revealed the magnitude of the tragedy. Fire crews had to make a difficult journey across the desert to reach the crash site. However, when they arrived, there was no one left to save. All 261 people on the aircraft, 204 47 passengers and 14 crew members had lost their lives. Rescue operations? The fact that the crash site was in a desert area made rescue operations extremely difficult. First, helicopters located the area and conducted a situation assessment. However, the complete burning of the aircraft showed that there were no survivors. Rescue teams first focused on extinguishing the fire. Even water supply was a major problem in the desert environment. Firefighting efforts continued for hours. Later, meticulous work was started to identify the victims. However, the intensity of the fire made this work extremely difficult. Most victims' identities were attempted to be determined through their personal belongings. Investigation process. After the accident, Saudi Arabian and Nigerian authorities established a joint investigation commission. International aviation authorities were also included in the process. The purpose of the investigation was to determine the causes of the accident and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Initial findings pointed to overheating caused by the left main landing gear not fully closing after takeoff. This situation caused the tires to burn and subsequently the fire to spread to other parts of the aircraft. Investigators examined the aircraft's maintenance records. The age and maintenance standards of the DC-8 model were questioned. It was also determined that the pilots had correctly applied emergency procedures. Technical analysis. The technical causes of the accident were examined in depth. Why the left main landing gear did not fully close was investigated. Various possibilities such as hydraulic system failure, mechanical problems, and electrical problems were evaluated. Experts stated that the DC-8 model was a safe aircraft widely used at that time, but that aging aircraft had systems that required more frequent maintenance. Landing gear systems were one of the areas that particularly required attention. How the fire spread so quickly was also investigated. The role of the amount of fuel in the aircraft, interior upholstery materials, and the ventilation system in the spread of the fire was examined. Families and social impact. The most painful aspect of the tragedy was the families left behind. Each victim had left behind spouses, children, parents. Most families had felt great pride when seeing off their loved ones on the pilgrimage journey and were excitedly waiting for their return. News from various regions of Nigeria revealed the magnitude of the tragedy. Families in Kano, Kaduna, Sokoto, and other cities were trying to get information about the fate of their loved ones through television news. Especially families living in northern Nigeria were hit hard. This region sent the most pilgrims in the country, and the vast majority of victims on Flight 2120 were from this region. Villages and towns were in mourning. In that era, when social media did not exist, communication was much more difficult. Families were trying to get information through radio and television news, waiting for victim lists to be announced. This period of uncertainty increased the pain even more. Traditional Islamic mourning rituals were organized. Mosques were filled for funeral prayers. However, the inability to bring the bodies to Nigeria was an additional source of pain for families. Most families could not see their loved ones for the last time. Media coverage and international interest. The accident found wide coverage in the world media at that time. International news channels such as CNN and BBC broadcast detailed news about the incident. In a period when interest in aviation accidents was high, this tragedy attracted great attention. Nigerian media headlined the event for days. Newspapers published interviews telling the life stories of victims and the drama of their families. Television channels organized special programs. The international Islamic community also showed great interest in the event. Saudi Arabian media sent special teams to the accident site. Leaders of Islamic countries issued condolence messages. In aviation magazines, the technical details of the accident were examined with long articles. Security experts made various suggestions to prevent similar accidents. International widely in the international aviation community. The safety of DC-8 aircraft was re-evaluated. Additional safety measures were recommended for aircraft of similar age. The Islamic world also received the tragedy with great sorrow. Saudi King Fahd sent a condolence message stating that they were in solidarity with Nigerian families. Aviation safety experts emphasized that aircraft safety was even more critical during busy periods such as the pilgrimage season. Additional safety measures were recommended for charter flights. Legacy and changes. The Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 accident led to important changes in aviation safety. Maintenance standards for aging aircraft in particular were tightened. Additional safety protocols were developed for landing gear systems. After the accident, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, issued new regulations. More frequent maintenance requirements were introduced for aging aircraft. Safety standards for aircraft used especially in charter flights were increased. Special technical bulletins were issued for DC-8 aircraft. More careful inspection of landing gear systems was recommended. Some airlines began to remove this type of aircraft from their fleets. Special safety standards were established for pilgrimage flights. Airlines operating these flights began to undergo stricter inspections. The Saudi Arabian government established special safety requirements for the pilgrimage season. Emergency training for pilots was strengthened. Additional training was started especially on aircraft control in case of fire. Similar scenarios began to be applied in simulator training. There were also changes in aircraft design. New generation aircraft landing gear systems were made more reliable. Fire detection and extinguishing systems were developed. Aviation safety awareness increased in Nigeria. The country strengthened its civil aviation authority and began to be more sensitive about compliance with international standards. Nigeria Airways also entered a fleet renewal program, commemoration and remembrance. As years passed, the victims of Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 were commemorated in various ways. Memorial ceremonies were organized in Nigeria. Families of victims organized prayer meetings every year on July 11. A monument was erected at Sokoto Airport in memory of the victims. This monument both honored the victims and reminded of the importance of aviation safety. Aviation history researchers continue to examine this accident within the scope of safety lessons. In universities, this accident was used as a case study in pilot training programs. Religious leaders referred to this tragedy during pilgrimage periods, reminding how precious life is. Safe journey prayers were made for pilgrims. Conclusion. The Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 accident was a tragic event in which 261 innocent people lost their lives. These people lost their lives while wanting to return home after completing the most sacred journey of their lives. This tragedy once again showed how critical aviation safety is. It revealed how a technical malfunction could turn into a major disaster within minutes. Today, aviation safety is much more advanced than it was at that time. However, the lessons given by Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 are still valid. Every flight reminds us how precious human life is. The 261 people who lost their lives left a deep mark on their families and in Nigeria. Their memory continues to remind us that aviation safety is an area that needs continuous improvement. And this video was prepared in their memory and to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. Aviation safety is not just a technical matter, but also a human responsibility.